All right, let's get started. Thank you for joining us. I'm Glenn Cohen. I'm a professor and deputy dean at Harvard Law School. And as such, I help direct Poplar. I also direct the Petrie-Flom Center for Health Law Policy, Biotechnology, and Bioethics. And we're incredibly grateful to have you all here with us. So I'm going to start with some logistical announcements, then just say a little bit about this panel, then turn it over to Mason Marks, who's going to moderate. First of all, if you've got questions, and we hope you do, please use the Q&A function for questions. We're not going to be using chat, and Mason, as the moderator, will handle the questions. Second, if you're not already a reader or a subscriber to our newsletter, we'd love you to join that newsletter, and we'll put a link in the chat and you can access it. Third, you should also check out our blog, Bill of Health, which is a wonderful read on all topics related to health law, bioethics, and biotechnology. And we'll also add a link to that in the chat. And lastly, I'll just say that our work on psychedelics and the law is expanding. And if you find this work interesting, please get in touch with us. All right, so with those preliminaries out of the way, let me just say a little bit about today's panel. So of course, military veterans and active duty service members, two very different populations, but of course some relation, experience unique stressors and are heavily impacted by depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and of course, suicide. Meanwhile, the available therapies we have for these kinds of conditions can be expensive. They often lack insurance coverage, and sometimes they have limited efficacy. Today's panel of all-stars will explore the role of law in the emerging use of psychedelic medicines to improve the health of veterans and active military personnel. Substances like psilocybin, MDMA, ibogaine can produce profound changes of cognition, perception, and mood. And although the research is still very much ongoing, clinical trials suggest they may produce very significant mental health benefits for these populations. But these substances remain Schedule 1 controlled substances, which are the most heavily restricted category, and none have yet received FDA approval. The legal status of these substances makes clinical research much more challenging and complicates their use in military populations. Therefore, many veterans and many active duty service members lack access. Some may forego treatment, others may turn to underground psychedelic communities or travel abroad to receive psychedelic medicine, often at high expenses. Legal reforms can potentially help increase the pace of research. So we've got members of Congress sponsoring the Breakthrough Therapies Act to change the scheduling of certain psychedelics. We've got other proposed bills that could fund psychedelic research or allow active duty service members to participate. We also see a lot of state activity. States like Texas and Connecticut have enacted laws to expand access or fund psychedelic research involving veterans. And we have an all-star panel today that includes experts on veteran health, psychiatry, law, public health, and psychedelics to discuss how advocacy and legal reform are impacting psychedelic medicine for veterans and active duty service members. And I'm going to turn it over to one of those experts, who's Mason Marks, who's going to introduce the panel and say a little bit more. So thank you all for being with us.
Thank you so much, Glenn, and welcome to everyone, including our audience and our participants. In a moment, we'll turn the event over to our amazing panelists. But first, just a general note regarding all of our speakers. Unless they state otherwise, please assume that the views expressed are theirs alone and not those of their employers or other organizations. And before we meet our amazing panelists, I'd first like to introduce a very special guest, Dr. Rochelle Walensky, a lecturer on law at Harvard Law School, who served as the 19th director of the Centers for Disease Control. Dr. Walensky will provide some preliminary remarks for our panel today. Dr. Walensky, welcome.
Great. Thank you, Mason. And really, thank you for inviting me to this important conversation. I have the task today of introducing the size, scale, and scope of the problem, which is disturbingly actually too easy to do. The burden of mental health illness in the United States is extraordinary. In 2021, we had 1 in 5 U.S. adults that had reported any mental health challenge, and about 5% of those with serious mental health illnesses that were limiting life activities. We do know, of course, that mental health correlates with suicide. About 46% of people who died by suicide in 2021 were known to have a previous mental health condition, and that is likely underreported, likely because we have a higher proportion of people who are undiagnosed. Suicide rates between 2001 and 2018 steadily increased. There was a bit of a decline in 2020, and then between 2020 and 2021, we had the largest increase in suicide that we've had since 2001. If we're talking about US veterans specifically, we can see that they may actually have an increased rate of mental health disorders. And I say may not because it's very hard to tell based on differential rates of screening and differential rates of potentially exposure, especially among young people in wars. We do know, however, pretty definitively that post-traumatic stress disorder rates are particularly high in veterans compared to the US population. That said, one of the most disturbing statistics, I think, is the differential rate in increased suicide that we're seeing in our US veterans. In 2001, the rate of suicide for non-vets and vets was 15 and 17 per 100,000. In 2021, those rates are now 18 and 27 per 100,000. So you're seeing a much larger increase in rates of suicide among our US veterans. So here's the key problem, and I think one that is really part of this important discussion today. While the mental health burden is increasing, the treatment options and treatment access are not, or haven't been keeping up the pace. So we have two ways of addressing this. One, we know that less than half the adults in the United States who had reported mental health illness actually had access to treatment, and that very much was disparate in both age and race and sex. We also know that our treatment options are limited, and that is really why I'm encouraged by today's conversation. We need more new novel treatment options, partially because of treatment resistance. We know about a third of people with depression have treatment-resistant depression. About a third to a half of people with PTSD fail to adequately respond. So we need those new options. And so as I pass things over today, back to you, Mason, I will just say that it is critically important that we have new novel options for specifically our US veteran population, but then also that we think in the context of those new and novel options, how are we going to get access both in price and ease? We know in the medical community that once a new novel methodology or method is reported in the literature, it can take 17 years to reach the community, and we don't have that kind of time. Back to you, Mason. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Walensky, for those very important and sobering comments. So we're now going to turn things over to our panel, and I would like to invite each of our panelists to take about 2 minutes or so to introduce themselves and provide any perspectives that they think are particularly important about this topic. And first, I'd like to turn to Dr. Lynette Averill.
Hi. Well, first, I would like to say thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this panel today. I am really excited. Always really treasure the opportunity to present with Marcus and Dr. Yehuda. So very, very much looking forward to that, and very much just appreciate the opportunity to talk about veteran mental health and the need for additional interventions. So I am an associate professor at Baylor College of Medicine here in Houston, Texas. Here I co-direct the eMERGE research program, which focuses on really the study of chronic stress pathology, stress and trauma-related mental health concerns, rapid-acting interventions, specifically psychoplastogens, if you will, ketamine, psilocybin, these sorts of things, and trying to better understand the underlying neurobiology, both of the clinical presentations as well as the interventions. Also recently was appointed as co-director of the Ethical and Legal Implications of Psychedelics in Society, or the Ellipsis program, along with Dr. Amy McGuire in the Department of Biomedical Ethics here at Baylor. Have an appointment at the Michael E. DeBakey VA here in Houston, and then also have the opportunity to serve as Chief Scientific Officer for Reason for Hope, which is a nonprofit focused on thoughtful policy in mental health and suicide prevention with emphasis on psychedelic medicine. And I have very long been interested in psychedelic medicine with specific focus on veterans. My father, who served in the Marine Corps during Vietnam, died by suicide when I was very young after years of struggling with ineffective treatments. Of course, since the early 80s when he passed away, we have made incredible strides both in our understanding of PTSD, our inclusion of PTSD in the DSM, and the interventions we have And while these interventions are incredible, life-saving, critical for many people, we know that they are not enough. We know that many veterans and many civilians alike continue to struggle, continue to not find healing or significant clinical benefit. And so there's such a great need to explore novel interventions, whether that is psychedelic medicine or any of the other things that are being explored in this field, neuromodulation or any other things that are in the pipeline. I will say, though, I think there's something exciting and unique about psychedelic medicine. I certainly grew up hearing some stories about psychedelics that were so contextually different than stories of other substance use, just in the healing, the meaning and purpose, the foundation for building lives people really want to be living, which I think is exciting. I have had the opportunity to serve in the last few years as subject matter expert for the Texas House Bill 1802, which supports a clinical trial of psilocybin for veterans with PTSD. I am now leading that trial and hopefully will start enrolling within the next couple of months. And then along with my colleagues at Reason for Hope have been able to engage in briefings in several states, served on the Connecticut Psilocybin Task Force, provided a briefing for the Canadian Veterans Affairs Committee on Mental Health and various things, and also have had the opportunity to co-author and publish some findings that have explored Special Operations Forces veterans who have left the United States to engage in psychedelic medicine treatment, which have been, I think, really, really important studies, though, of course, a myriad of limitations to those, as those are observational studies, but very excited about psychedelic medicine for veterans, as well as active duty, certainly for veterans, though, both broadly and very specifically, while being grounded in understanding the reality of these interventions, limitations that they have, concerns for safety, any of these things, and very much look forward to today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Next, we'll turn to Marcus Capone. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's good to see everybody, Lynette, Rachel, Juliana. So I'm Marcus Capone. I am the chairman and co-founder of VETS, Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions. We're a 501c3 nonprofit. VETS provides resources, research, and advocacy for U.S. military veterans seeking treatment with psychedelic therapies. I'm also the co-founder of a public benefit corporation, Tara Mind. We are looking to expand the safe and equitable access to psychedelic therapies, over the next 5 or 10 years as these molecules come through the FDA and become FDA approved. My story is a little bit different than Lynette and Rachel's. I served 13 years on active duty, and I was prescribed antidepressants starting in 2010. And I was on them at a max of 10 different prescription medicines from 2010 to 2017. And, I was one of those individuals that Dr. Walensky was talking about. I was treatment resistant to really anything that traditional approaches to medicine had to offer. And so I sought healing outside the country where some of these psychedelic treatments are legal or unregulated. And when my healing was so profound, my wife and I wanted to pay it forward, and that's how we founded VETS. And we're closing in now in 5 years on funding close to 1,000 veterans that are seeking these treatments. And we're a bit overwhelmed with the amount of applications. We get upwards of 10 applications a day. We turn away almost 9. So we really need the federal government to step in and start funding research. Because the more that individuals learn about these medicines, the more they're going to seek them out. And so I think as a country, it's our responsibility to do this correctly. And so we really need funding from the federal government so we can do more research and eventually, as these treatments become FDA approved, we can then offer up these protocols to thousands of veterans that need them.
Thank you so much for joining us. And just as a reminder to our audience, if you do have questions for our panelists, please do submit them through the audience Q&A feature within Zoom, and I will include them throughout our discussion to come. We'll next turn to Dr. Rachel Yehuda.
Hi, and let me also say thank you for this invitation, and it's great to be on the panel with Marcus, Juliana, and Lynette, and you, Mason. I'm a professor of psychiatry at the Icahn School of Medicine at Mount Sinai, and I'm also the director of mental health at the Bronx VA. I've held those positions for a really long time, and I've been in the VA system for about 35 years. And I'm very committed to advancing solutions for veterans and PTSD. That's not how I come to this, though. I did in 2020 start a Center for Psychedelic Therapy Research. That is a joint activity between Mount Sinai and the VA. But I came kind of with a more skeptical stance towards psychedelic therapies, mostly because I was very concerned about really the hype with which psychedelics were being discussed. And so I thought, this seems too good to be true. But if it's even a little true, that probably would be good too. And was pretty surprised at how limited the research had been, especially compared to how much people seem to want to run with this as a new treatment for mental health. So our center does clinical trials on MDMA-assisted psychotherapy and also on psilocybin therapy. We're interested in mechanism of action of how these drugs work from a neuroscience perspective. And we're also interested in the question of how we're going to educate and train a workforce who currently work with veterans and other traumatized or mental health populations in how to work with psychedelic medicines, because it's quite different than the kind of therapies that are currently available.
Thank you so much. And now we will turn to Juliana Mercer. Welcome.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here and great to see familiar faces. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what coast you're at. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I've been working with veterans post-military since 2006. While I was in uniform on active duty, I spent some time working at the Wounded Warrior Battalion, receiving our veterans that were coming home with all different types of injuries and helping them to transition into a civilian life post-injury. That work helped me to enter into the veteran nonprofit space post-military and continue to work with nonprofit organizations that were helping veterans with a goal to help them thrive post-military. It has been very frustrating work. We've tried so many different things, from regular traditional medications and therapy to surf therapy and even puppies, yoga, meditation. The needle of veteran suicide has not moved in the right direction, no matter all of the things that we have tried as communities. So it's been heartbreaking and frustrating work, and psychedelics in my own life were something that helped me to heal. And I had such a profound experience that I knew that this was the solution that I had been looking for my veteran brothers and sisters. I'm now the director of veteran advocacy and public policy at Healing Breakthrough. We're a nonprofit with a mission to get federal support and federal funding for MDMA assisted therapy within the VA system. And I'm also on the board of directors of a nonprofit called just completely blanked, Heroic Hearts Project. And we send veterans to other countries for psychedelic therapy, other countries where it's not illegal. They've sent over 800 veterans and 100 spouses, connected them to psychedelic therapy and coaching. And there's over 1,000 veterans on the waiting list. So there's a dire need for these therapies, and looking forward to having a conversation around how we can move forward with this.
Thank you so much. My first question for our panelists is about the potential of psychedelics. What can psychedelics potentially do for veterans or active duty service members that existing treatments cannot currently achieve? And we did get a question from an anonymous attendee referencing the hype, certain risks and uncertainties. So if you'd also like to address how we can take a balanced approach to these substances, please feel free to address that as well.
Who's first? I'm first.
Absolutely.
I was looking at Rachel and she was looking at me, I think. I don't know. So I'll go first. So I think psychedelic therapies, in my experience, again, and Juliana has a similar experience, we didn't find healing through traditional approaches. And so what we did find was that all the antidepressants that I was prescribed from, again, from Western medicine, were really putting Band-Aids on what I was experiencing, whether it was depression and anxiety, obviously some of the trauma that I had as a child through the military, maybe some of the TBI I experienced as a contact football player at 7 years old, all the way through my time as a breacher, as an explosive expert. Psychedelics get to the root cause issue, and it get there pretty quickly. And that's what I experienced. And again, I can't say and talk for thousands of others, but what I was trying to achieve in 7 years, I was able to achieve in almost a week. And along, paired with, a very well-trained trauma therapist who was also certified in psychedelic integration, she was able to really help me process what I've been trying to process for, almost 7 years. And so what traditional medicine is not doing, or what traditional medicine is supposed to do, that takes individuals 5, 10, sometimes 20 years. I believe, through my experience and the thousands of other stories I've heard, that psychedelic therapies get to the root cause issue. And if we get to the root cause issue, we don't have to do therapy for another 5 or 10 or 15 years. We can move on and enjoy our lives. And so that's where I think psychedelics are so profound and so powerful of dealing with underlying trauma.
I can go next, I guess. Here's the promise. So we have to see if the promise gets fulfilled. But the promise here is a new way to address mental health symptoms, and I think specifically for veterans, trauma-related ones, like PTSD, in a new way. And what Marcus described is really familiar. The idea that what we currently do is try to suppress symptoms through medications. And the medications actually do that. But the question that has arisen is whether that's a sufficient thing to do. What many people find is after a while, the medicines stop working, or they need more than just a suppression of symptoms. They need to kind of not be re-triggered and to work out some of the feelings they have about the things that happen to them. The kind of therapies that we currently offer have really been based on a model of fear extinction, which is something traumatic happened. People felt fear and helplessness. And the method of counteracting that is through fear extinction, extinguish the fear. But the reason that that doesn't work for so many of our veterans is that there's so much more to it than fear, than having been exposed to fear. There's a lot of guilt, there's shame, there's moral injury, there's readjustment. There's also the complexity that a lot of what happened in service was something that made you who you are in a really good way. In that sense, when you're traumatized as a veteran, it's very different than a civilian, because you trained for it and you knew that some good was going to come out of those experiences. So it's pretty complicated, because you don't want to shed all of it. You just want to shed the parts that are awful. And sometimes those involve kind of decisions or kind of that were made in the fog of war, or things that might have worked then that you're really revisiting now. And it's just so much more than what a regular course of cognitive behavioral therapy or antidepressants or other medications can offer. The promise of this is that it allows an exploration in a kind and gentle, compassionate way of some of those experiences that are difficult to integrate, difficult to understand. They're kind of being kept kind of in a room separate from who you are, and you can't get rid of it and you can't internalize it. And there's something about the psychedelic experience, and again, as Marcus said, when you get to really discuss it with and process it with the appropriate therapist, that can help. But I think that research needs to be done to see if we have this promise fulfilled. And at the time of this podcast or seminar that we're having, it's very important to underscore that about a third of the people that are treated with psychedelics in clinical trials really don't have this promise of breakthrough therapy or breakthrough healing. So that's kind of why we want to do the research. About a third of the people speak so glowingly of it, and about another third have a marked improvement that still requires some treatment, but we really made a dent through the use of psychedelics. Again, we are doing a trial specifically in veterans and specifically in a VA, but there aren't so many. And so what we want to do is keep doing this work so that we can understand this better.
Let me just note something else I think is really important, just building off what Marcus and Rachel have both said, that there is something I think relatively unique about the psychotherapy piece that goes along with these interventions, and that it really empowers the veteran to be the expert, and really empowers the veteran to have more sort of role or responsibility in deciding what to address when. That's not to say that, of course, the facilitators are not critical and lean on their own expertise and clinical judgment, but that it is more of a supportive intervention than a more very strictly manualized sort of agenda based. And certainly I will absolutely own I'm a bit of a rebel with the evidence based, very strongly agenda focused interventions. I do them, I have that training, and I also operate slightly outside the box. I think just sometimes that's not how our existences go. That's not how trauma goes sometimes, that it doesn't fit nicely in these agendas. And I think that's a useful thing. I think because these interventions are also very rapid acting, that it gives an opportunity to kind of quickly, dare I say, sort of cut through some of the bullshit, both between the therapists and the person, but the person, that for many folks, they have been dealing with whatever they are here in this intervention for months, years, decades. And, that there's ideally been preparation work to kind of really put them in a good spot to engage in these dosing sessions. And the dosing sessions then can really, for many folks, again, certainly not a one size fits all, but for many folks kind of get right to the heart of things, again, with appropriate support and, all of these things. I think that's a really critical piece as well. And I think also the thing that I would say is, that, Rachel, I really love, I've heard you say this a few times, that there is so much potential here. And even if a part of the hype, even if a little tiny bit of the hype turns out to be true, then that's great. If it means we can help a couple of people that we weren't otherwise helping, in my book, that's a win. That's absolutely a win. Certainly, I am not moving forward in this expecting that this is, the panacea and we're going to cure everybody. That's absolutely not. That's not the reality. But I think the potential to help people, some who will have really great transformative experiences, and some who may have kind of mediocre experiences, but then be better able to get more benefit from an SSRI, or going back and doing, one of the evidence-based trauma treatments or something like this, I think is really where some of that magic, pun intended, is really happening.
What kind of obstacles, legal or regulatory obstacles, are people facing as they try to do this research or to gain access for veterans? I think at least two of you are involved in sending veterans abroad to receive psychedelic medicines where it's legal. So what kind of obstacles do people face while trying to do this research or increase access?
Well, certainly from the research perspective, I think there are a couple of obstacles. One is that doing any sort of clinical trial is always burdensome from a regulatory perspective, a paperwork perspective. Doing research on psychedelic medicines right now is especially so because they are Schedule I drugs, meaning there are various restrictions and additional bits of paperwork, approvals, bureaucracy that scientists or investigators have to get through, that includes DEA approval, the Drug Administration approval, to be able to actually research with a drug that is considered by the federal government to be illegal, to be unsafe, to be these sorts of things. Approval from the FDA, which is, putting forth our protocols to say why we want to study this, why we think there is benefit or merit in studying this in a particular population, why we think that the cost and risk benefit is appropriately balanced to where we're not putting people at undue harm, these sorts of things. And then figuring out sort of some of the logistics that go along with that, because these are DEA. They require special additional security measures for pharmacy, for storage, for administration, and these kinds of things that, a trial, say, of ketamine even does not require some of these additional pieces. So from a science and research perspective, there are additional hurdles to doing this work, just in terms of time and burden and these sorts of things. I think, though, from a clinical trial perspective, because these are still very much investigational, even though psilocybin and MDMA, two psychedelic medicines that are farthest along in the FDA pipeline, both have been granted a breakthrough therapy designation by the FDA, which indicates that the evidence so far suggests that these interventions are as good or perhaps better than what we currently have, that they seem to have a pretty safe profile, and that they seem to have relatively limited abuse potential. Even with those things in place, they still are illegal according to the federal government. So from a science perspective, there's additional hurdles, time, etc. And from a participant perspective, someone who is interested in participating in one of these studies or accessing these interventions, it means that often the study eligibility criteria have to be very narrow to try to limit any potential safety concerns, which of course for a veteran population who we know in many, many cases are very complex. These folks have perhaps significant trauma histories before their military service, even have significant physical comorbidities, often have chronic pain, may have substance use issues, many have cardiovascular concerns, diabetes, any of these sorts of things. May have suicidality, may have traumatic brain injury. Often, all of these things are going to be exclusionary from clinical trials, meaning that sometimes the people who may most benefit or most need to have access to a novel intervention are going to be explicitly and intentionally excluded for the purpose of science as science is done. There are very good reasons for that, and it is also highly unfortunate. And I think speaks to the reason why places like Vets and Heroic Hearts are sending people, supporting people going outside the country so that they can access these. Certainly much more I could say about that, but I know that I've sort of rattled on, so I'll stop there.
Well, you brought up something that I'd like to build on a little bit, which is the exclusion criteria of the clinical trials, which can often be very strict and exclude people with serious health conditions. And as you said, a lot of times it's veterans who might need an effective intervention the most who might actually be excluded from trials like that. And so that's why some potentially are going elsewhere. And now we're seeing states start to introduce programs to create access to psychedelics outside the conventional healthcare system, like in Oregon and Colorado. But in a lot of cases, they are relying on those exclusion criteria from the trials to build their exclusion criteria for their Oregon program or their Colorado program. How, if at all, do you think that might affect this ecosystem where veterans are trying to seek effective interventions?
From what I understand, the states that have legalized psilocybin, for example, have made an explicit statement that they're not legalizing it for mental health treatment. So I think that's a confusing message. And so I think they're legalizing it because they think that these compounds are safe enough for people to be able to use them and use them for the purposes of exploration. Many people will believe that they are using it for healing purposes, but I don't think that that's the explicit approval. So that can create a certain vagueness, especially because if you really do have a serious mental health condition and you seek psychedelics to help you gain the kind of insight into your mental health condition, it does require quite a bit of integration and follow-up work with somebody who's in a position to help you do it. So again, you know, working in the VA, doing these clinical trials, I feel really fortunate that we can keep providing anything that the veteran will require. We can get to know a veteran for a while before psychedelic therapy, the possibility of a clinical trial can be brought up, and also just make sure that they receive what they need afterwards. And also our studies include a 6-month and 1-year follow-up. Because again, this information is lacking. We need to learn more about what happens in the long run. How long does this miracle last? You know, what kind of things might bring about symptoms, and what is the best thing to do about that if that happens?
My question was prompted in part by a question from our audience, from Tyler Lampy, asking about these state-regulated programs and how some veterans might, instead of having to go travel abroad, they might be able to go to Colorado, for example, which I believe in Colorado, they are actually promoting this program as a medical therapy, perhaps unlike Oregon. Would it be preferable for veterans to travel abroad or to go to a place like Colorado, or maybe somewhere different, like in Connecticut, where the system really it leverages an existing FDA pathway, the expanded access pathway. So there's a variety of different options potentially available to veterans. How do you view those different ways of accessing psychedelics?
Who did you direct that to, Mason?
Anyone willing to jump in is welcome to.
That's a really loaded question. I think back to the hype around psychedelics, the word is out that these things work, especially in the veteran community. We do a really good job of networking and talking to each other about the good things, the solutions that we've been finding. And this is the one that veterans are coming back home and telling their brothers and sisters, this is it, this has healed me, and you should go connect to vets or Heroic Hearts Project too, and get the healing that you deserve. So with that said, I think it's really important that we're having conversations around making sure that we have guardrails in place when they're going out of the country, making sure that they're involved in community, making sure that they're supported. I personally always recommend to be in working with a therapist in addition to a coach that can help you through navigate the process. Without those conversations, we're putting people in danger. And I appreciate the state level work that people are doing, and I really do hope that we're able to put the right guardrails in place for at the state levels. I think it's really important to get the federal government engaged so that we can do this on a larger scale and have the right guardrails in place. And having an organization like the VA and having the prestigious institutions that are studying these compounds engaged and involved, and having them be the ones that are telling us how we should be doing this, how we should be rolling out these types of therapies within healthcare systems, I believe is the way that we should be going.
I think you've really asked a complicated question. And again, in general, I mean, I would say veterans are highly remarkable people that are very competent and have agency. And many of them have tried the conventional ways of healing and haven't gotten the results that they need. I think the most important thing that should come out of these kinds of conversations is that seeking help is something that veterans need to do. And if in their journeys they seek psychedelic help, then that should be done as responsibly as possible. And it's up to the veteran to understand whether they have the right supports to be able to engage in this, whether, you know, what their history has been with other kind of treatments and modalities. So, you know, I'm hoping for a world where there are going to be a lot of options. But I'm also hoping that because we seem to be going so fast with psychedelics, we need to similarly grow our community mental health resources so that people who do avail themselves of psychedelics for whatever reason also have the ability to continue doing work and unpacking any discoveries that might have come up for them. And so I'd like to see the conversation about access to psychedelics include just access to mental health services by people who are, if they're not themselves people who do psychedelic work, are very informed about it and could really take the ball after someone has had a psychedelic experience and do what I think is actually equally important work, which is just bring forth the observations.
I think that some of you interface frequently with legislators, perhaps even in Congress, about these issues. I'm wondering, what kind of response do you get from lawmakers when you bring this subject matter to them, and what would you like to see them do? What would be the ideal response from them? And I'm sure
So I want to speak to what Juliana, Lynette, and Rachel spoke to, which is lack of awareness and education. And so the more information that we can get out there, the more individuals are going to be informed if they do decide to make the decision to seek out psychedelic therapy. And so we know that there's a way to do this carefully and correctly and safely. And if individuals aren't given the education, they're going to do this on their own. They're going to do this in underground, quote unquote, clinics that may not be providing the right support. They, you know, speaking just on our organization at Vets, we get many individuals who reach out not seeking psychedelic treatment, seeking the wraparound services that are provided because they went and did a treatment somewhere and didn't have the support, and it unlocked a bunch of traumas that they weren't able to deal with, and now they just want the services. They want access to our trauma trained therapists. And so that's where I think that if veterans and not just veterans, right? These are everyone seeking these treatments. I think it's our job over the next couple of years to really be very proactive in providing better awareness and education around that this is not just a drug. If you're taking the drug, you're just doing a drug, taking a drug. But if you're wrapping around the services that all the experts here on the panel are talking about, now we're talking about whole treatment protocol. And then you bring in community, which Juliana mentioned, which is the other piece that they're saying, hey, I just want access to a group of individuals that are experiencing the same things that I have, that I can talk to and open up about it, and heal with them, because it's hard to heal by yourself in the mountains of Idaho, when you don't have that support.
I'd love to jump on that. One of our participants, it's so correct what you've said. One of our participants actually said that the experience made him he felt his armor melting. He felt that all of the defenses that hold him together, he just realized he could take off his vest, he could just begin a process where he wasn't afraid to begin to do the work, to explore, wasn't afraid of being triggered, wasn't afraid that he wouldn't be able to relax enough to lean into the work. So again, the point that this is a breakthrough in somebody's therapy, which means it's kind of a watershed moment where you can get a whole lot accomplished and really prepare yourself to do work in a very different kind of way. He also said that he had had a lot of treatment in VA before, that when he did the traditional therapies, they didn't land. But now, after having the MDMA experience, what he was able to say was, I get it. I get what those treatments were about. I can avail myself, like Linda said, I get it now. I get what these treatments are supposed to be doing. And so really the idea that this is a full course meal, if you just do a psychedelic journey, is probably a misleading message, but that this is a critical juncture, a critical inflection point in somebody's journey towards healing. That's correct. And then we just want to make sure that all avenues are open and that everybody's really very understanding of how to work with somebody who might have gone to Peru last year, but is still bringing up a lot of memories and wants to process them. And that's just something that will require, a re-education of clinicians all across the country and the world.
I really want to bring it back to legislators and, what kind of changes would you like to see in state or federal legislatures? What kind of changes are you or others advocating for, and what would they look like?
I can speak to what Healing Breakthrough is advocating for. So we're focused on getting federal support for the current efforts that are at the VA. There's 7 trials ongoing. Rachel's is one of them, and those trials have little to no federal funding. So there is no government skin in the game. My organization, we've met with over 300 offices and have garnered overwhelming support from both sides of the aisle on science-based treatment for PTSD. When we walk into a legislator's office and we tell them the efficacy rate of MDMA-assisted therapy based on the phase 3 clinical trials, and they hear that something has the potential to be 70% effective in eliminating a PTSD diagnosis, they start paying attention. Our legislators have been wanting to figure out ways to solve the veteran PTSD crisis and the suicide epidemic that we've been dealing with. They've been trying to find solutions just like we have, and they've been frustrated with the lack of solutions. So now that we're able to show them something that is evidence-based, that the VA is already looking at, they're very open to providing federal support to it. And we really think that the VA is poised to be able to roll out a treatment. They're the largest healthcare system in our nation. They're the foremost experts on PTSD. And we think that they're the best position to be able to roll this out. And we believe that the federal government needs to be involved and financially support these efforts to heal our veterans here at home.
Just comment briefly that, you know, I really like what you said, Juliana, and I think I've had the same experience in speaking with some of these groups with my colleagues at Reason for Hope and the Veterans Mental Health Leadership Coalition, that there is incredible support on both sides of the aisle, bipartisan support, and I think the reason for that is that I don't know if it is fortunately for the progress of the science and access, or very unfortunately for the reality of things, but I think we find ourselves at sort of this precipice, at this point of a mental health crisis that it is really hard for anyone to ignore. And when presented with interventions that have potential, even if we exclude the hype, and you know, I think when we've had these conversations, we try to be very grounded in, yes, there is great potential here, and these are not a panacea. This is not a golden bullet. This is not the miracle cure. And Rachel, as you very nicely said, this is not a one and done, you go in, do the intervention, and you are cured forever. That this is a part of the journey. And I think certainly, you know, people who have done this could say it is a rather challenging and difficult part of the journey, and requires a lot of work before, during, and after to maintain those benefits. I think, though, that generally, you know, that though we're talking about veterans today, and that when I have been having these conversations, I am generally in a room with veterans. The veterans themselves are also, yes, veterans, and that is a critical piece of their identity and who they are, and how they're connecting with these legislators, but they are also mothers and fathers, brothers, sisters, friends, colleagues, and people see themselves in that. People see their loved ones in that. They have the connection to the veteran, but they also, I think, often are thinking of themselves in an experience with ineffective treatment, or their own parents, their own loved ones, their spouses, their children. And certainly one of the incredible people I have had the opportunity to do some of this work with is a mother who lost their son, and the feeling in the room as we are having these conversations, people get it. People connect with that and understand that this is not some far off, distant thing that doesn't affect them, that doesn't affect them or their families. And I think we find ourselves at a point in time when I don't think really the most privileged among us can very easily say, oh, no, we're fine. The interventions we have are fine. No, we don't need to worry about this or pursue anything further.
Let me just jump in. I just, because we have very limited time, I apologize. I just want to get a few more audience questions. And David Benzian asked a question related to what you're saying. If there's so much support for this and people, it resonates with so many people, what is the holdup? Why are the dollars not flowing? And where is the bottleneck, and what will change that?
There are some people in DC that are not, they're not on the same boat as we are here. There's a strong conservative group right now that is blocking a lot of the efforts on the nonprofit side. You know, they're using religion and conservatism and some other things, saying that, you know, these drugs are bad, and you know, we all know here on this Zoom that is not the case. You know, specifically, you know, if we want to get into a spiritual conversation, I would say I think our survey, over 95% of the individuals who did a psychedelic journey either brought their faith back or found new faith. So I don't, you know, if we want to get in a religious conversation, that we can do that, because I know almost every individual that has gone through treatment is finding their spirituality or finding their faith back to Christianity or Judaism or whatever it is. So I don't think that's a conversation that we can't win. So there are some people in DC that are blocking these efforts. And so we have to convince those individuals that, what we're doing is healing individuals. We're not telling them to decrim or legalize this. We're telling them we need you to release funding for clinical trials, for more research. There's only so many people that me and Rachel know who have a lot of money that can continue donating to these efforts. But as a nation that has 340 million people and 30 to 40% that are really struggling, we need federal dollars released. And so we are having those conversations behind the scenes with some of these groups. These are not bad individuals. They just think a certain way. And we have to convince them, again, what I said earlier, through the stigmatizing these molecules, education. We just need to continue doing that. And I think eventually we will be able to, quote unquote, break through and convince folks that we're asking for money to allow access to treatments that heal.
You brought up spirituality, and we had a question from an anonymous attendee who brought up this sort of new religious movement that often involves veterans, and wonders if you might speak to that. Is that a potential avenue for community for veterans who might be seeking to access psychedelics through more of a spiritual path?
Yeah, I mean, I could speak a little on this. My wife is a strong conservative Christian from the Midwest, and she runs a psychedelic nonprofit. I think that should tell. I think that goes a long way. And by the way, she's never, she never had the need to do a psychedelic therapy. Her mental health is fine, but she sees the healing power in this. And she's a believer that these, quote unquote, plants, if they're plants, they've been here forever. They've been here since the day that everything started. And so if these were here for individuals to utilize to heal, we should utilize these plants to heal, whether they're synthesized or whatever, but they were put here for a reason. And I think that to say that these therapies are evil, I think people are miseducated. I think these treatments are bringing people closer to, as I mentioned earlier, if it's spirituality or if it's religion, it really doesn't matter, to bring them to something that's connecting them to themselves, to other individuals. I don't want to get into talking about whether I think religious churches and should we should hide behind religion to use psychedelics. Like I don't believe that. I think that's the wrong message that we're sending to folks. And so, if that's a whole nother conversation that I don't want to get into for sure. We got to crawl, walk, and run here. There's a lot of individuals that we just need to convince that these medicines are here for healing. Everything else, it may take time.
Thank you. So we're running very short on time. Speaking of time, and I want to just give each of you a moment to give just a few parting words, just a soundbite, a tweet length comment. What's most important to you as we move forward?
What's most important to me is continuing to have these conversations, continuing to educate ourselves, educate our communities, and educate our legislators, and get everyone engaged in our community's healing of mental health.
Thank you.
I would second that. Very wise words, and I think just continuing to have the conversations, continuing to push, really push the agenda and work for thoughtful policy, very thoughtful research, certainly the flow of dollars. And I just would note to anyone listening on this, if you are a veteran or a consumer or someone who loves a veteran or consumer who may be interested in this, just please be very thoughtful and safe in your approach to exploring these. Make sure that you have all of the appropriate things in place to ensure your safety as much as possible.
Excellent. Thank you.
I'd say, educate yourself, write your congressman, contact your representatives, share your story, contact other veteran organizations, to what Lynette said, I think we do need to be a bit aggressive, but I also think we need to be cautious. So if we can be cautiously aggressive, because if we're too cautious, we're never going to get there, and people are going to die. And if we're too aggressive, people may get hurt. And so I don't know that line. I'm just aggressive in nature. I sometimes run into a building on fire and forget the water, but that's why I have people who are surrounding me to help with that. And so I just think we need to follow the research, ask questions, don't believe everything you read, and just continue looking for and being interested in innovative solutions that we really need at this moment in time.
Thank you.
I
Dr.
like what everybody has said. I think that those things are great. My phrase is not cautiously aggressive, it's cautiously optimistic. Because I am really excited about this. And yet I also know that what's really important is to proceed slowly, methodically, soberly, and just get the data, especially about the people that are not having as great outcomes, so that we can really understand these therapies. But what I really am encouraged about is that we are talking about veterans, and we're caring about veterans, and we're talking about their unique mental health needs that are also quite generalizable. We're talking about doing something that is completely new, because what's so exciting about this moment is that if this is the way towards mental health healing, then we have a lot of insight into why the traditional therapies may have not done as much as we have wanted them to do. So it's a moment of great optimism. And I know you focus on the legislature. I think they're listening. I think we have everybody's attention. And so it's just, hopefully we'll be able to be really good stewards of the moment, so that we can bring forth something in the most responsible and equitable manner possible for our veterans and for everybody else.
Well, thank you very much to everyone who's joined us today, to our amazing panelists. I want to thank Professor Cohen, Dr. Walensky, and the Petrie-Flom staff, Laura Chong and Chloe Reichel. It's been a pleasure to chat with you. Please stay tuned for future events from the Petrie-Flom Center and the Project on Psychedelics Law and Regulation, and have a great afternoon.